Hello there, people of the internet. So I have a very interesting topic for you guys today. What if Russia had created the SKS 10 years sooner? Now, of course, this is entirely speculation. I mean, there's no way to know for certain what would happen if Russia had managed to pull that off. So Russia, since 1891, was using their Mosin and rifles. These right here replaced the Berdan rifles. Berdan rifles, that's a whole story in itself. That's an entirely, different topic. But Mosin and served faithfully in the Russian military for a very long time. I have something in my bolt carrier. Get out of there. Get out of my Mosin. But the Mosin served Russia for a very long time, along with a good number of other countries. This one right here is a finished, refurbished 1891 pattern. A very, very nice rifle. I actually really like this rifle. But Russia went into the Second World War with their Mosin as their primary firearm. Now, they did have self-loading rifles, the SVT-40, but because the 7.62x54 rimmed, which is the same cartridge that the Mosin fires, is such a powerful, potent round, the SVT-40 required a lot of very intricate work to get it functional properly and safely. 7.62x54 is just a very potent, very powerful round. Now, if the SKS came around with its 7.62x39, chambered in 7.62x39, which is an intermediate caliber cartridge and way less powerful than the SVT-40. These are much easier to manufacture than the SVT-40. So I feel like if this had shown up 10 years before it did, it probably would have been put in the hands of basically every Russian soldier that was out there on the front. The Mosin, I imagine, would likely be used as a second-line rifle because these right here would become Russia's primary rifle. Now, if this had become, mainstream 10 years before it actually did, the AK-47 had not even began development. Hell, the STG-44 had not even began development. Russia would actually be on the cutting edge of technology in terms of self-loading rifles. The United States adopted the M1 Garand in 1938, I think. Was it 38 or 32? Let me check that real quick. It was 36. Okay, so 1936, the United States ended up adopting the M1 Garand. So yeah, about 10 years later is roughly around the time when the SKS would have come out. So the SKS would have been on par with about the same time that the United States adopted the Garand. And the SKS, in my personal opinion, just for what battle was actually taking place in terms of like distance and capability and whatnot, would be a better battle implement than the M1 Garand was. The M1 Garand was just too powerful for what urban combat was taking place over in Europe during the Second World War. So during the Second World War, the Germans also had some self-loading rifles, so whenever the Russians were fighting the Germans, in actual reality, for the most part, the vast majority of everybody had bolt-action rifles. It was Kar 98s versus these Mosin and Well, eventually the Germans did adopt the G41 and the G43. These were like self-loading rifles chambered in the full power 8mm Mauser round, and they eventually got around to the Sturmgewehr chambered in the 8mm Kurz round. However, the G41 and G43 were on the front in very limited numbers for basically the same reasons why the SVT-40 was on the front, for very limited numbers. And the STG-44 going onto the front, Germany, whenever they implemented the STG-44, they did not have the manufacturing capabilities of providing enough ammunition for the STG-44. Now, the STG-44 is a simpler design than the SKS right here, has an external magazine as well. I imagine after the war, if the SKS was, mainstream in military service, we might actually see the SKS be converted into something more similar to the STG-44 versus Russia adopting the AK-47, but we'll get into that more here in a second. I imagine that Russia probably would figure out a way to stamp the SKS system as opposed to adopting an entirely new system like the AK. With Russia fighting the Germans and getting first-hand experience on the Sturmgewehr, with its stamped sheet metal design, very simplistic design, very capable design, they realized that these intermediate caliber rifles could be made a lot easier than what they were actually making them in. basically all of your Russian manufacturing at the time, in a real life situation, not the hypothetical situation, all your Russian manufacturing at the time was basically all like milled and forged and whatnot, because that's what you needed to have for the designs of rifles that they were using. But I imagine if the SKS had come about before World War II instead of right after World War II, it didn't quite manage to get into military service soon enough to actually see action in the war. But if it had come before World War II, I imagine a lot of simplifications for the rifle would have come about, and I imagine eventually the Russians would have figured out a way to stamp SKS here, and they probably would have just figured out stamping for the SKS, which at that time would have been a tested, proven system, and they likely would not have adopted the AK-47. In all honesty, with SKSs, I mean, at that point, they would have adopted them by the millions, and they would have handed them out to every soldier, and that's what everyone would be trained on. We'd likely see simplification and then modernization of the SKS platform, and I don't think that the AK would have ended up being adopted. Eventually, it would get to the point to where the SKS would likely have a detachable magazine, basically like the AK system does, and not like those aftermarket mags for the AK that have that really awkward nub on them. We'd probably see something basically identical to the system that we have on the AK. We would also likely see a lot of modern intuition that we see done to AKs nowadays. We'd likely see those on SKSs. We see a lot of that with like sporterized SKSs and Bubbaed SKSs and whatnot. I think that would become mainstream in the actual Russian arsenal. If Russia actually managed to pull off adopting a self-loading rifle before the war instead of right after the war, they would have like legitimately been on par with US military technology in terms of their self-loading small arms, and I think that they actually would have been a little bit above the curve, having adopted one in intermediate cartridge. I feel like we would eventually, as the war progresses, start to see SKSs in like LMG form as 7.62x39 becoming the obvious choice for the primary cartridge that these troops were going to be issued, replacing the 7.62x54 rim, not necessarily replacing, but like also essentially replacing the 7.62x54 rim in a lot of service, much like we saw Russia do after they adopted the AK-47. 7.62x39 is just a better practical application round for what combat was taking place at. Like the distances combat was taking place at, it's a powerfully sufficient round. It's a 30 caliber cartridge. I mean, it's capable. It is a capable round, and it is definitely a way better option than going into combat with a Mosin and 7.62x54 rimmed. And during the war, as war progressed, as they simplified the rifle, more Russian soldiers would get their hands on the rifle. The Russian SKS would have been absolute cutting-edge technology if it was just a little bit earlier. And I feel like it would have been so cutting-edge that not only would they have pushed further development of it through the war to work out all of its kinks and whatnot, and I mean, if it was adopted 10 years before, they would have had time before the Second World War to actually issue it to the troops and to actually set up tooling and whatnot for mass manufacture and to work out all the kinks on the rifle and whatnot. Just whenever you mass manufacture a firearm, there's a lot of things that go wrong during the manufacturing process that makes them not all that reliable, and every rifle goes through that stage. But during the war, I imagine a lot would be figured out with this platform, and we would see a lot of this being pushed onto the front, basically entirely replacing the Mosin and in service on the front line, and the Mosin and would probably be pushed to like rear echelon troops as a secondary emergency rifle. There were so many Mosins that were made out there, but a lot of Mosins were made during the Second World War. Like, a lot of them were made during the Second World War. And if that was replaced by the SKS, then I feel like the SKS system would be way, way more predominant than it is today. We would see other countries adopting the SKS system like way sooner than they actually did, and they would not replace them with a Kalashnikov system, because I feel like, I personally think that Russia would not replace the SKS with Kalashnikov if the SKS had simplified stamping procedures, which I'm sure they would have figured out through the war, if it had magazines that were similar to the Kalashnikov system here. They might end up adopting a long stroke gas system to replace the SKS gas system that it actually has right now. that would be a further simplification process. But besides that, I think that they would absolutely keep the SKS system. It's a very interesting concept, and it's one that warrants some thought. Military technology has always been, they kind of ease their way into it, and militaries were using bolt-action rifles for a very, very long time, until eventually they adopted self-loaders, because that very much became the way of the future. There were some exceptions. Russia did use some 1895 lever actions that were chambered in 7.62 by 54 rim, that fed from a stripper clip that, I mean, you fed it from the top of the rifle as opposed to a tube magazine. It had like a box magazine inside of it. Those are really cool, and I would love to get my hands on one of those for the channel. But that was actually during like the First World War era as opposed to the Second World War era. If this had come out like before World War II and Russia was able to produce this and give it to the troops, it absolutely hands down would have been an entirely different story for everything that had happened in Russia. And I feel like the SKS system that we see nowadays would be entirely different compared to the SKS system that we would see in this alternate reality. Five rounds? Well, this is a 10-round magazine, but lo and behold, I'm a small-time gun channel. If you want to help support and give me the opportunity to get more ammunition and make more content, then go ahead and check out both Patreon and Utreon. I have them linked down in the description below. But I want to hear what you guys think on the topic, because like I said, completely hypothetical. There's no way for anyone to know what the hell would happen in this system. I feel like I said, I personally feel like if this was, you know, adopted 10 years earlier and got into the hands of the Russians, we would see simplification of the actual SKS itself. We'd see a lot of stamping. We'd see a long stroke gas system probably get adopted, and we'd see better magazines get adopted, external magazines that you can swap out very readily and easily like you can on the AK. And I feel like if that happened, the AK probably would not be adopted. We would likely see a stock system along with a pistol grip system thrown onto the SKS like we see on the AK right here whenever it is discovered that this is a really good system, and absolutely what they were leaning towards. But besides that, I think that we would basically just see a more modernized SKS, and the AK would probably not exist. And I gotta say, I'm glad that's not the case, because I really like the AK, and I'm very happy that it exists. Well, I hope that I don't piss any people off, because I always manage to piss somebody off whenever I make a video like this. Just like a not necessarily controversial video, but a video that goes against what actual reality is. Like I said, 100% hypothetical. This is not something that happened, but I still feel like someone's going to go down in the comments and be angry that I said Russia probably wouldn't adopt the AK-47 if they had a much more modernized, stamped version of this right here. They might even figure out some sort of way to have a dust cover on it, and the dust cover might actually start to resemble the same exact dust cover that we have on the AK. Might have a slot right here for the charging handle. I mean, there's a lot that might happen with this. Who knows what would happen in that universe? So let me know what you guys' thoughts are down below, like I said. And besides that, I don't think I have anything else to add here. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. Would have been cutting edge, and the things that they were going up against, full power rifle rounds that were semi-automatics, still not ideal for the urban combat that was taking place there in Europe at the time. So Russia would have an intermediate caliber rifle, semi-automatic, but going up against something like the Sturmgewehr, which had a 30-round detachable magazine and an intermediate caliber cartridge, that absolutely would blow this one out of the water. But Germany was not able to institute that rifle to the amount that they needed to be able to really make a change in the war. They didn't have the ammunition for the rifle, and they didn't have the manufacturing capabilities to supply as many of those rifles as they actually needed to. That's why so many were still using bolt-action 8mm Mauser rifles all the way up until the end of the war. I imagine once Russia came across the STG-44, they probably would have noticed the stamped sheet metal design on it, along with the external magazine, 30 rounds, and they would probably be like, you know, that's the way to go, and they would figure out how to stamp this. I'm not sure if they would actually manage to stamp it during the war itself, because stamping technology takes time and it's a process, and it took some time to figure it out for the AK-47. So I'm not sure if that would actually happen during the war itself, but I'm sure that they would attach an external 30-round magazine to this bad boy, or maybe 20-round magazine, or some kind of external magazine to this bastard. And then after the war, they'd probably focus on learning how to stamp this thing. And then once that happens, like I said, they probably add a pistol grip along with a more appropriate stock, and they'd probably end up shortening the system a little bit, because this right here is a very long, cumbersome rifle. Those are some simplifications and modernizations that I think we would see in the system if Russia had this thing through the war and was able to learn with this thing through the war. We saw some of that with the Mosin. They shortened the rifle considerably towards the end of the war with the M44 series, and they added the bayonet directly to the side. Much like the SKS, they had the bayonet attached to the rifle itself, as opposed to like the 9130 where you had to keep the bayonet somewhere on you and you had to like physically attach it to the rifle in the event that you decided to use it. It's a very interesting topic, and I could sit here and probably ramble on about it for quite a while, trying to figure out what would have been the best move for Russia at the time if this had shown up. This really would have put Russia on such an advanced small arms technological plane compared to everywhere else. Once the Germans invaded, I feel like if the Russians had these SKSs, the Germans would have never even made it to Stalingrad. That is my prediction, just because of how incredible the SKS rifle would have been on that battlefield going up against bolt-action Kar 98s. Now, if Germany was defeated far sooner than Russia had originally done, then perhaps the STG-44 might not have even become a thing, and maybe all of the small arms platforms that we have nowadays, which have clear inspiration off the STG-44 system, maybe none of these would exist. And maybe our magazine systems and whatnot, because the STG never existed, maybe everything would still be based off of old school designs like this right here. And maybe we'd be running around with something like the Ruger Mini 14 as opposed to our AR platform, because something like that was just never made. Germany never got to the point to where they were able to develop the STG, because they were all overran by the Ruskies armed with SKSs here. But that's just another what if in the vast, vast sea of what if stories that would develop from this topic. Go down in the description and let me know what y'all's what if is. I'm actually kind of curious on this topic, so let me know what y'all think down below. Like the video, subscribe. Description has a bunch of links, including Utreon and Patreon, if you feel like supporting the channel and you want to see me do more work like this and send more lead down range. Like I said, I'm a small-time YouTube channel, so I don't exactly have an unlimited budget, and as a result, I can't remember the last time where I made a video where I actually put like a full magazine of ammunition down range. I always do partial mags. Alright, well, it is getting dark, so I'm going to move that there, and I'm going to gather up my stuff, head inside before I can, you know, no longer find my way to my house. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like I said, description, bunch of links, and the comment section. Let me know what you guys think might potentially have happened. There's a strong possibility that after the Germans were fighting the Russians, they would probably have developed an intermediate cartridge system, much like the Russians would have done with the SKS, but their system might have looked more like the G43 or something like that, kind of mimicking how the SKS looks like an old school design. Or hell, it might even mimic the G41, like with the bolt-action semi-automatic system, just with an intermediate caliber cartridge, whenever the Russians start kicking the Germans' teeth in. That was Kevin! Hey, Kevin's making noise. Those who don't know who Kevin is, he's my peacock. I got 4 of them, they're all named Kevin. Hell, it might even get to the point to where the United States ends up developing an intermediate caliber version of the M1 Grand. I mean, maybe we would have, like, the M1 Grand chambered in, I don't know, whatever our equivalent of 223-556 would have been at the day. That obviously came with later developments, so I'm sure that we'd probably develop some kind of snub-nose 30 caliber cartridge. Well, I guess we did have the 30 caliber carbine, but we would probably look into something a little bit more powerful than that, because for all intents and purposes, that was a pistol caliber carbine. Maybe it would have become more mainstream. I'm not sure. These are all what ifs in this hypothetical situation. So yeah, you guys go down to the comments below and let me know what you guys think. That being said, have a fantastic day. I have to go before it gets too dark because I already can barely see my household. Oh God, I figured out why Kevin's honking. They're being chased by my puppy. Sasha, you leave Kevin alone, God damn it. I got a puppy and she's like 4 months old and she's very happy and excited. All right, you guys go off, have a fantastic day. I'm gonna go save Kevin. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.